I'm Mary Dombrowski, and this is War and Magic. This series explores the relationship between the relocation of the ethnic Japanese in 1942 and top-secret code-breaking operations nicknamed Magic. In this episode, we zero in on the moment when intelligence gathered by magic code-breakers provided the turning point for World War II in the Pacific. Our first guest is Frank Vincent Wolf. In June of 1942, Vince was serving with a U.S. Navy weather team at Dutch Harbor, Alaska. At that same time, our second guest, Jack Klamm, was serving on the USS PC-571 following a transfer from naval radio operations on Bainbridge Island. At that moment, in June of 1942, a crucial question faced the U.S. Navy. Would Imperial Japan send its undefeated naval forces into the North Pacific to Alaska? Or would Japan attempt to seize Midway as a base from which to strike Hawaii? Remember that U.S. fleet capabilities had been seriously compromised just 6 months earlier at Pearl Harbor. Where would U.S. commanders station their fleet? Let's listen as Jack and Vince tell the story.
Hello, my name is Martha Wildking, and I am here. The month is October 2006 at the home of Vince Wolf on Bainbridge Island, Washington. And I am going to have the pleasure of interviewing Vince. He is a retired Navy gentleman who served for 22 years in our United States Navy during World War II as well as during the Cold War. And I'm going to cover 3 basic aspects of Vince's life. One is I'm going to cover a little bit about who he is as a person. And also I'm going to cover his Pearl Harbor experience and his experience at Fort Ward here on Bainbridge Island and his experience in the Aleutian Islands off of Alaska. So with that, I first want to say one thing about Vince. I have toured Vince's home today, and what has really impressed me about this gentleman, who is aged what?
Well,
in your 80s there?
I am 87.
87.
I will be. Well, let's put it this way.
Right.
In a month, I'll be
in
87.
a month, 87 years young. Vince is a man, to me, of extraordinary patience, and that goes along with the area of how he served our country. And I would like to just show you a few of the things that Vince has here. This is one of his carvings. He is a gentleman who began carving in the 1950s, 58. All the art training that he had was in high school.
Right.
And the high school was located where?
It was in a little town called Plains, P-L-A-I-N-S, Plains, Montana.
Plains, Montana.
300 people.
Wow. So it just goes to show you what you can do when you put your mind to it. But this is his carving, which has particularly intrigued me. And this is of an Indian warrior. I want you just to notice the detail on it, because I think it really says a whole lot about Vince's life, as the coloring, and it's just in really perfect symmetry with the Indian paraphernalia, the spears, the arrows. And I love the horse's face and the mane and how perfectly each piece is carved. So I'm just going to turn it over real briefly and read the bottom of it here. See if I can get it correctly. And Vince, you've also won a lot of awards for your carvings, have you not?
Yeah, fortunately. Somebody thought they looked good, so they gave me a ribbon or 2.
Yeah, a whole wall full. This carving of the Arapaho War Chief Powder Face was inspired by the 1903 watercolor by C.M. Russell. And this piece of his Indian War Chief was done in 1994. I noticed another piece here too. This is not of a carving, but it is of a, oh, this feller's heavy, of a bronze. Is that correct?
That is bronze.
A bronze piece. And it's of a cowboy. And again, that amazing, intricate detail which I think says an enormous amount about Vince Wolf's life and about his ability to focus on the things which many people miss. You were in the Navy as ended up in the Navy as Petty Officer 3rd Class from 1937 to 1941. Of November. And as we recall, on December 7th of 1941 is when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Where were you during that attack?
Well, our destroyer division had left Pearl Harbor. There's 4 of us, 4 ships, went back to San Francisco for R&R, because and we were there, and that's when I left the ship in November of 41. The ships all went back to Pearl Harbor.
And the name of your ship was the what?
The USS Conningham.
Conningham, all right.
And hull number DD-371, if that's important.
Here we go. It is important. So when Pearl Harbor was attacked, you were on leave. You were in Oregon?
I was at my grandmother's house in Oregon, matter of fact, on that Sunday morning, and as John Denver and I was in Grandma's feather bed, and Grandma says, "Vinny," she says, "something's happening at Pearl Harbor." And she says, "I don't know where Pearl Harbor is." I says, "I do. What's happening?" She says, "Something about an attack." So, of course, I bounced out of bed and went to the radio, which there was no TV then. And
strictly radio, right?
Strictly radio.
Okay.
And listened to what was happening next week I went down to the recruiting office and because I was ready to either get out or sign up and re-enlisted.
At that point you were Petty Officer 3rd Class.
I was Petty Officer 3rd Class.
1941.
Right.
And so you?
So I was then I was sent to the Naval Air Station at Sand Point near Seattle. And I was there for 2 days and they didn't really know what to do with me. So they had an aerographer radioman at the receiving station in Bremerton, which was located at Bremerton at the time. So they traded us. He went to the air station and I went to the radio station. And we were there for probably 2 weeks, maybe 3 weeks before we moved the whole station to Bainbridge Island, which had just completed a new Radio Puget Sound on Bainbridge Island.
Radio Puget Sound on Bainbridge Island.
Right.
Well, you were at Fort Ward, and at Fort Ward there was a school.
There was the intercept school copying Japanese transmission.
Right.
And also...
and then there was an intercept station.
That was right.
And then there was the communication center at Fort Ward, which is where you were. All right. And I think you would work very diligently, as I read.
It's just a matter of sitting down with your hearing our cans. We used to call them cans and put on our ears, and we just start sending. And there's I wished I had a key here. I could demonstrate it to you, but you went
the Morse code.
Yep, Morse code, and you send these messages in as fast as you could. And we had another. I had become quite proficient in what they call a speed key, and it was it would make dashes and dots much faster than the ordinary up and down key. So we could.
A precursor to the computer, perhaps.
Absolutely.
Well, now going from Fort Ward, with your work there at Fort Ward, what happened when you left Fort Ward? Where did you go next?
They were making up weather teams to go to the Aleutians. Now, remember that we had no satellites or nothing that gave us this marvelous technology that we have today, and get to the TV and you can see the weather wherever you might want it, and what's going to happen 2 weeks from now, pretty much. And they didn't have that, so the Aleutian Island is one of the worst places in the world for weather. It's terrible.
Because?
It's terrible of the winds, the
Right.
fog, the waves. And, you know, we had winds of 100 miles an hour, 100 knots, or whatever you want to call it.
Right.
And, you know, it was miserable up there at times. There were times it was beautiful. In the spring, sometimes it wasn't bad at all. But nevertheless, they had to know in their operations what the weather was bringing. And at Dutch Harbor, we had an airport, or a naval air station, but they were flying patrol, PBYs, which is a big patrol, floating patrol bomber.
All right.
And that's all they had at the time.
At Dutch Harbor.
At Dutch Harbor, right.
Which was in an area of the Aleutian Islands.
That's right. So we had to get all these information for the weather, because they were making flights down the chain, you know, reconnaissance flights and everything, to know what was happening. And so they formed us up into weather teams, usually consisting of a couple of radiomen.
Which you were.
Which I was. And usually junior grade radiomen, rather than and they usually had, and they had the heading up the group would be usually a first-class petty officer who was an aerographer, and he was we called him the weather guessers. And
an aerographer?
Yeah. Then usually were two of those.
Right.
And they had a cook, and so there was usually anywhere from 5 to 6, 7 men assigned to these groups. And one of the groups was already out on Kiska, and the leader of that was a first-class aerographer by the name of House, and he was captured by the Japanese when they landed on Kiska. This was right around the time of the Battle of Midway.
Which would have been, what, 19?
June 3rd or 4th or 5th, 6th, somewhere in that area of 1942.
All right.
And I was assigned to a group, and I had to refresh my memory on this, but we were assigned to go to Adak.
Adak, Alaska.
Adak, Alaska, which later became quite a naval base. But at that time there was no one out there. So we were assigned to that, and in fact, we were aboard the vessel that was going to take us out there. It was a YP boat. YP, and we called them Yippie boats.
YP, right?
Yeah, for patrol. They were actually old fishing vessels that the Navy had more or less commandeered to take us out there. Well, we were aboard that morning. We had our gear all packed in our bags, and we were ready to go on the YP boat out to Atka, and we'd only been there about 2 hours.
All right. And
they said, okay guys, pack your gear up, go back to the barracks, because the Japanese are landing out there. And so that took care of that, and rather than being out on the Aleutians at that time, I stayed at Dutch Harbor.
Stayed at Dutch Harbor.
And they attacked us the next day.
They attacked you at Dutch Harbor, the Japanese did?
As I recall, it was the next day, which was June the 3rd. 1941.
1942.
42.
Okay, June the 3rd. Now, when you say that the Japanese attacked Dutch Harbor, June the 3rd, 1942, was this the only place on American territory during the war that we were actually physically attacked?
Oh, no. They landed it on the Aleutians, and the Aleutians were our territory. So they landed at Kiska, established a base at Kiska. They landed at Attu, which is the last island in the Aleutian chain, and they landed there. And we finally sent troops in there, but they did this, the Japanese were so extended in their lines of communication and supply, that they abandoned the Kiska operation and evacuated their people by submarine and whatever during foggy days and weather. So as it turned out, I think they made a couple of sorties into Atka, but they didn't actually take over Atka.
Well, when you were there, when they attacked Dutch
Yeah,
Harbor, bombing, what occurred?
They're aircraft carriers, planes.
All right.
It was a carrier strike.
What do you remember of that?
Well, we knew they were coming. And
Because?
They had intelligence.
Right.
They had broken the Japanese code, and this was all during the same time as the Battle of Midway.
All right.
So
Midway is occurring
Midway
right
at
now,
the same
at the
time, essentially.
Right.
And this was the northern Japanese force that had been assigned to take some portion of the Aleutian chain.
Okay.
And so we knew they were coming, and they woke us up on the morning of June the 3rd at, I believe it was something like 4 o'clock in the morning, and we had already prepared slit trenches and places to defend ourselves.
What exactly is a slit trench?
It's
I don't
just
really
a
know.
shallowed hole in the
Okay.
ground, a trench, and it isn't very deep.
Okay.
And so we just to get below the surface of the ground if there's a bombing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we were given, shortly before that, we were given helmets, which we didn't have before, and they were the old British type, the old flat rim,
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't have the new ones yet. And we were assigned, we were given 30-06 bolt-action rifles, the old standard rifle that had been around since World War I and before. And we were to defend our split trench was just beyond our station our weather station,
Right,
where we
where
did
you
all our
were.
weather copying.
Mm-hmm.
So I was there, and there was a pillbox just behind me up the hill, just a short ways away from
Help
me.
me with the pillbox. I don't know
A
what that means.
pillbox is a kind of a little concrete box that,
Okay.
you know, to protect you.
All right.
You know, or supposedly they set up a machine gun in there or something
That's
of
what I'm
that. There,
thinking.
there wasn't a machine gun
Okay.
in there, but that's what it was.
Pillbox, no machine gun.
For. That's right, no
Right.
gun. And anyway, just slightly after daylight, and the first sign that we had of the Japanese, the Japanese Zeros came over, were strafing, you know,
Mm-hmm.
shooting there, and they came so close, and of course, I think I took one shot with my 30-06, but I can see the pilot of this one yet. I can see it.
Wow.
And they went right by me, and it was grinning at us.
Ooh.
You know, but they went. There was a PBY taking off out in the bay down below, and they shot it down because we went right over the top of us. And so after that, shortly after that,
Was anyone killed nearby you?
yeah, they were, and I'm just coming to
Okay.
that. Yeah, after that, the high altitude bombers came over, and the Japanese. I learned this later, but they all dropped their bombs on their leader's signal, and they were in formation. So when the commander of their group signaled, they all dropped their bombs at the same time. And I tell you, they're scary. They're screamers. And, you know, the closer they got, I went down in my trench, and I must have buried a foot of soil up the barrel of my rifle. Anyway, it was a pretty good bunch. And there was a kid right up by the pillbox, and he had either been in it or he got out of it, but it just blasted him all to pieces. But anyway, I felt something and hit my foot, and I thought, oh boy, thought that some shrapnel got me. A big clod of dirt.
Oh, thank heavens for that. After your time at Dutch Harbor, what occurred after this point then? How much longer before the war?
Well, after the attack, we, you know, the station was there, and we still had to do our job, and I was still there until 1944.
While interviewing Vince Wolf today, I have a special guest, my friend Jack Klamm. And Jack is also a World War II veteran who served as a radio man at Fort Ward. And first, before we go into what occurred at the Aleutian Islands as well as Midway at the same time, I want to just ask Vince and Jack, how did your paths cross?
I had a hardware store here on Bainbridge Island from 1970 to 1975.
And what was it called?
It was called Jack's Bainbridge Hardware. And I hired a fellow that had, whose company had just gone out of business, up where Lumberman's, in that area where Lumberman's is now. A fellow by the name of Vince Wolf, and came and worked for him in my store, but we never talked Navy. And it wasn't until after I closed the store and later on got together with Vince that we found out all of these things of crossing of paths.
Paths had crossed, but you really
Shortly
didn't know.
after the war, for a while after the war, we didn't talk too much about it.
Yes.
I think that's why we worked together and just didn't talk about it. But we both came out chief radiomen.
Isn't that interesting? Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting in what Vince has said is that during the attack on the Aleutian Islands and Dutch Harbor, that Midway was also occurring. And what were the connections between the two of these?
Well, it has since come out that Yamamoto, who was in charge of the Japanese Navy, had a very complex plan. He had predicted to the Japanese top command that he would be able to control the Pacific for about 6 months after Pearl Harbor. He figured, being a Harvard graduate, he estimated the United States would recover enough to become a danger again militarily in their Navy after 6 months. And here it was just about 6 months. So he devised this plan to take Midway Island, which was very strategically located west of Hawaii there ways, and named Midway because it is Midway.
Right.
And the plan that he devised was one in which he would send a fleet to the Aleutians as a sort of as a decoy to try to attack the Aleutians just before attacking Midway, and hoping to draw the remnants of the U.S. fleet north, or some of it anyway, to protect the Aleutians, and then he would attack Midway with a really large force and occupy it, and hopefully lure the rest of our ships, whatever they were, into a trap which he set up by bringing a large part of the Japanese fleet up behind the invasion force of Midway. Fortunately, we had done a pretty good job in learning to decode the Japanese naval code. We had started, of course, with the diplomatic code before World War II, and before we were in it, and then the Navy code came next.
And that was your area of expertise.
Well, I was not a decoder as such, but I worked with the equipment later on of that handled the codes. I even repaired some of the code machines at times. But anyhow, the whole thing was our ability to read the Japanese code, which was probably one of the biggest secrets of World War II. We knew that target Y was the real objective. Now, just because we could read the code didn't mean we had a full book open to us of what they were saying, because smart people like the Japanese were, militarily very smart.
Where is target Y?
Yeah, they had designated the targets by names like that and passed that word secretly to the proper people. So all we knew was that target Y was their primary objective, and they had a secondary objective at first. So we finally were able to determine what target Y was by a little ruse that Nimitz pulled. He had Midway people, which he suspected was one of the targets, sent a report in the open, plain language, that they had trouble with their evaporators there, which are totally dependent upon for fresh water in a little coral reef like Midway. And
so that was a ruse?
It was a ruse.
Okay.
And sure enough, a few days later, one of our intercept stations that we had in Australia, in conjunction with the Australians, picked up a message in which just general information sent to naval forces down in somebody in the New Guinea area, some Japanese outfit saying that Target Y reports are having freshwater problems. So we knew that Midway was a primary objective, so we did not fall for the bait of trying to go rescue the Aleutians, knowing that Midway was it, and we were prepared for Midway. We didn't have much to fight with, and they had hoped to surprise us like at Pearl Harbor, but instead they were surprised. We picked them up on radar when they were about 60 miles out. We put our planes in the air, our small force, and we were all ready with anti-aircraft fire and that, and we gave them quite a bad time. So they, Japanese radioed back the last of the flights that came in on the first wave, said that they're going to have a second wave because we were too well prepared. They hadn't been able to put us out of commission. And it was while they were preparing the second wave that our carrier planes caught up with them, and eventually all 4 of their carriers were sunk, and all we lost was the already damaged Yorktown.
The Yorktown.
And that shifted the balance of air carrier power in the Pacific forever.
They lost 4.
They lost 4, and we lost
1 out of our 3.
And the 1 was the damage. When the Japanese thought they'd already sunk down at Battle of the Coral Sea. So that was such a big turning point in the war, primarily because we were able to break the Japanese code and read it, and well, there were many instances of the code serving us so well throughout the whole war. But that was basically what happened at Midway.
At the beginning of the war, the Japanese Zero was a superior aircraft. It was better than anything we had in the fighter aircraft at all.
The Japanese Zero?
Zero.
Zero, okay.
Right.
Oh.
And they had never been able to get a hold of a Japanese Zero. Anything that they had was all beat up. They couldn't restore it. But it so happened that during the Battle of Dutch Harbor, one of the Zeros was shot down.
That's where you saw the pilot's eyes.
That's right. One of them, he was in a Zero.
Oh, all
Whether
right.
that was this one or not, I have no way of knowing.
Okay.
But one of the PBYs, the patrol bombers, had been just to the east of Dutch Harbor, and on the way back to Dutch Harbor, he spotted the wreckage of a plane in the muskeg down on the tundra, and it had flipped over on its back. Well, it was a Zero. So they sent a group out to salvage it, and the pilot, apparently a 30-aught slug or whatever, had cut the line, and the fuel line, and he crashed. He tried to land with his gear down, his landing gear down. Well, he hit this muskeg, and it just flipped him over on his back. Well, it broke his neck, and he was laying there, and to get him out of there, but they salvaged this Zero and took it back to the States, even put our insignia on it and tested it out completely.
Did it help our
Understanding
understanding
That's right. They came
out
with much better aircraft and things that could far out, and also the Japanese sacrificed the safety of their pilots to the maneuverability and the lightness of the aircraft, whether we tried to shield our pilots.
Well, I would like to thank both Jack and Vince for their huge help today. Jack was just telling me that he's how many years young?
89.
89, and Vince, of course, is
87.
He's coming up 87. I won't be 90 until next June.
All right, there we go.
Right on the anniversary of the invasion of Midway, June 5th.
Oh, okay. You're right in there.
I think the important part, though, is to remember, and to remember our history. And when we have the gentlemen that we do here today, I believe that it's important for all of us as Americans to remember and never forget. So thank you so much, and it's been a pleasure being with both of you gentlemen today.
Thank you.
It's our pleasure. We really appreciate the opportunity to give our first-hand experiences, which we hope will keep history straightened out for the future generations.
Thank you.